In today's video, Trisha shares 3 biases all coaches should be aware of.
Hi, I'm Trisha Friedman. Welcome back to this week's 5-Minute Friday. On this week, I'd like to talk to you about 3 biases that I think all coaches should be a little bit more aware of when they're making decisions, when they're working with teams, or even when they're reflecting on their own skills and strengths. The first bias that I would like to talk about is confirmation bias. You might be familiar with this. Essentially, it's the reality that sometimes we are going into a situation and we already have formed an opinion. So when we are doing research or when we're gathering more data, we might secretly be sort of searching for the pieces of data or the suggestions that confirm our original opinion. It's really easy, unfortunately, to slip into this bias. We like being right. And so sometimes when presented with evidence, it's really hard to ignore some of the data that suggests we are right. The second bias I'd like to talk about is anchoring bias. This is when we're presented with information and that piece of information is something that we give way too much weight to, and then we sort of become closed off to any pieces of research or opinion that comes after that. That basically we are biased to perhaps the first pieces of evidence that sway our opinion. And lastly, the third bias that I think we need to be a bit more aware of is called closeness communication bias. For those of you who might take the exact same route to school every single day, over time you might notice that you've stopped paying attention to a lot of the details. That's the way closeness communication bias works too. If we've been working with peers and colleagues for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, the closer we come, sometimes actually we stop listening to them as best that we can. There's research around this that actually suggests that that's why sometimes we're more likely to divulge really personal information to someone that we don't know that well, because we might be seeking out somebody that listens to us in a different way. If you're really interested in closeness communication bias, I just want to give a little shout out to this book, You're Not Listening, by Kate Murphy. It's fantastic. It's actually where I started doing more thinking around closeness communication bias. Okay, so if we know that confirmation bias is something that we might sort of make the mistake with, that we might unintentionally be seeking out information that really confirms our initial thinking, what do we do about that? My suggestion would be, when you're going into that decision-making process or that team meeting, stop and ask yourself, well, what actually might sway me? Or what questions do I need to ask in order to move into the tension that there's elements of this that we're not thinking about? I think you really need to put the reality out there on the table that I have this opinion. I might easily be swayed to continue to agree with myself unless I think a little bit more about X, Y, and Z. And I think if you're not asking yourself, well, what would allow me to see the other side? That's going to point out to you that your opinion is fixed. And then in that case, if your opinion is really fixed, don't waste the time of others. When it comes to anchoring bias, I think it might be a really good idea when you're working with your team or your partner just to ask each person to sort of make that contribution of, well, what is the anchoring piece of evidence that might have swayed you from the beginning? I think, again, just sometimes having your cards on the table and realizing, well, this was my first experience with this thing, and that's why I've been influenced in the way that I have been. I think in EdTech, we see this example all the time. If you have tried a new application or you've tried out a piece of software, or even if you've tried to execute a lesson in the classroom with a certain tool, and if that's not gone well, that might really anchor your beliefs around how reliable that software is, how worthy of your time it is. I think sometimes first experiences are not truly indicative of what a tool, an approach can do. So put the cards on the table and just say, this was my first experience. This is how that swayed me. The closeness communication bias. The closer we get to some people, the less likely we are to listen really closely to them. What can we do about that? We've talked a little bit on Coach Better and on this playlist about the significance of moving our meetings to new locations. If you're always meeting in the same space, go for a walk. Try to make the situation a little bit different, or try to restructure your agenda. Try to ask different types of questions. And also just make sure that you're leaving room to be surprised by your colleagues, even those that you know best. I think if you stop seeing those people as capable of surprising you, you're kind of diminishing their potential to really help you pivot and grow more. If there are cognitive biases that you think coaches should be aware of, please let us know. Leave a comment. I would love to know what other biases you think coaches and school leaders need to be a little more aware of in order to coach better. Thanks.